Good afternoon and welcome to this council meeting on Tuesday the 25th of June 2019 at the Council Chamber, Main Street, Bairnsdale. East Gippsland Shire Council live streams, records and publishes its meetings via webcasting to enhance the accessibility of its meetings to the broader East Gippsland community. These recordings are also archived and available for viewing by the public or used for publicity or information purposes. At the appropriate times during the meeting, any members of the gallery who are addressing the council will have their image, comments or submissions recorded. Please ensure that mobile phones and other electronic devices are turned off or in silent mode for the duration of the meeting. On behalf of Council, I would like to acknowledge the Gunai-Kurnai people, the traditional owners of the land on which we are gathered, and pay our respects to their elders, both past and present. 1.2, apologies, Mr CEO.
Madam Mayor, Councillor Toohey is an apology for today's meeting.
Thank you. 1.3, declaration of conflict of interest.
Madam Mayor, I have one from yourself for item 5.1.4.
Thank you. 1.4, confirmation of minutes, that the minutes of the ordinary council meeting held on Tuesday the 4th of June 2019 be confirmed. Thanks, Councillor Peltz. Second, Councillor Ellis. All those in favour? Motion's carried 6-1.
Madam Mayor, just on the conflict of interest, due to a recent board appointment, I believe I'd need to declare a conflict of interest in that same item.
5.1.4. 1.5, next meeting, ordinary council meeting, Tuesday 6th of August 2019, to be held at the Omeo Recreation Reserve, Park Street, Omeo, commencing at 1 p.m. 1.6, request for leave of absence.
None have been received, Madam Mayor.
1.7, requests to speak about your community project.
There are none for this meeting, Madam Mayor.
Thank you. Item 1.8, public question time. We have Mr. Andrew Bassett. Would you please like to come and speak just up here next in front?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. My question relates to the objection or review removal of restricted covenant as per the Eagle Point Structure Plan, Eagle Point Restricted Covenant Variation. I'll preface the question with your letter dated the 18th of June 2019 was to update us, as in the residents, in relation to the progress of the finalisation of the draft August 2018, and refers to the implementation of the structure plan proposing conversion of the existing low density residential to rural living zone 1, which is 2 hectares. However, the final draft June 2019 referred to for the purposes of today's meeting has been amended to include and to review the restricted covenant as per sections A4 for Matheson's Road precinct. So my question to you, Madam, is what does review actually entail, given that your agenda for today's meeting states as an item that agreement may be reached to remove the restricted covenant, as planning controls will then provide guidance and character objectives?
Thank you. Mr. Hollow, or?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Madam Mayor, I note on the agenda that item 5.2.2, adoption of the draft Eagle Point Structure Plan, is listed. And given that that particular report is located at 5.2.2 of the agenda today, I believe that question can be answered during that presentation, and if there needs to be any further clarification, we can do so as well at that point. Does that suit?
Okay. Thank you. Mr. Michael Freshwater, would you wish to come and ask your question?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I didn't know this happened this way. I thought it was read for by the CEO, so I haven't got my written question with me. I'm just asking whether, I'll start by saying, some years ago, there was a motion moved that the art collection of the Shire be catalogued. I'm wondering if this has happened.
Mr. CEO, are you able to?
I will pass, Madam Mayor, I will pass over to Ms Nelson, but just for clarity, I can read the question as it was put from Mr Freshwater. Could you please advise if the Shire art collection has been catalogued? There was a motion moved and carried some years ago by council that this happened. If not, why not?
Thank you. I have to admit I'm not aware of a specific motion, but this is certainly something that has been something that officers have been working on, and more recently reporting work has been undertaken, and there's regular reporting happening through the Audit and Risk Committee. So the works have recently been catalogued. They've also been valued and assessed by a professional art consultant. And so for insurance purposes, we have a valuation for all of the artwork and a current condition assessment, and a range of recommendations that have just been received in respect to improvements in the way that we do actually manage the artwork that council has ownership for, which we're working through at the moment to determine how we can resource and what level of action can actually be taken in respect to management of the collection into the future. So it is something that is being actioned and reported against.
Thanks, Ms Nelson. Item 1.9, record of assemblies of councillors for May, June 2019. Thanks, Councillor Rotino. Do I have a seconder? Thanks, Councillor Roberts. All those in favour? Motion's carried. 8. 1.10, petitions, Mr CEO.
Madam Mayor, there are no petitions that have been tabled today.
Yep. Notices of motion and/or rescission.
Again, nil, Madam Mayor.
Item 3.1, deferred business.
This is not deferred business in any way. Madam Mayor, may I have permission to switch off the air conditioner because I'm starting to cook and also it's interfering with my hearing. Thank you, Madam Mayor.
Sure. Think we don't need one. Is there deferred business, Mr CEO?
Madam Mayor, yes, there is deferred business, and if you will note in your papers that we wish to deal with that post and after the budget matters.
Thank you. Item 4, councillor reports. Councillor Rotino.
Thanks, Madam Mayor. I just have a couple of quick items to speak about, both relating to education opportunities in our Shire. I recently had an update meeting with the Gippsland East Study Hub and met with Joanne Scammell, who's the Higher Education Study Hub Program Coordinator. She's been employed as a coordinator for this project, located at our community hub. The stakeholders in the hub are Jane Ponting and the Gallen Network, or the Gippsland East Local Learning and Employment Network, TAFE Gippsland, East Gippsland Shire and Federation University. The meeting at the hub discussed update on the hub, and it was an opportunity to see exactly the progress is being made ready for the opening of the study hub to students. The hub will provide high-speed internet, video conferencing and student support, making it possible for students to access university locally via supported distance education. The hub will make use of the latest technology so that students who cannot relocate for whatever reason have the flexibility to study locally. The concept is modelled on a successful project that was seen in Cooma called the Country University Centre. The Gippsland East University Study Hub will provide and have a presence also in Wellington and be open for business next semester. The facility will be providing tertiary courses including postgraduate courses, social learning, external examinations, study support and outreach service options for Omeo, Orbost, Mallacoota and Yarram for the Wellington hub. East Gippsland has one of the lowest university participation rates in Victoria, which is largely due to affordability. The second item, again with that education theme, was Federation University had a stakeholder engagement meeting in Bairnsdale, and Lee Kennedy, the new head of campus for Federation University Gippsland, conducted the event. The event provided Federation University with an opportunity to share information regarding the development of a number of significant health sector initiatives, including the delivery of occupational therapy and physiotherapy courses and the Federation Business School MBA locally here in Gippsland. The university explained to stakeholders on how the uni is willing to work with regional stakeholders, especially organisations and industry, to enhance future education and in turn employment opportunity prospects for our region. Fed Uni is working towards being Gippsland's regional university. It also flagged, first time in its history, a residential scholarship program for disadvantaged students from our region. It was a shame that we're only representatives from only 2 of the secondary colleges there, because I think this is something that all our Shire should be interested in and hear about, students being able to attend university through one of these scholarship programs. I did have it put to me and to our group that local government has nothing to do with education or shouldn't be in that space, and whilst we don't deliver education firsthand, we certainly should be encouraging and enabling this as an enabler for our region. So thank you, Madam Mayor.
Thanks, Councillor Rotino. Councillor Reeves.
Thanks, Mayor. Good afternoon, everyone, councillors and all our visitors in the gallery. My report is dominated by our time at the ALGA, Australian Local Government Association National General Assembly last week. I've written a long report, 4 or 5 pages, and thankfully for everybody here, I'm not going to read it, but I'm going to draw out 3 main points that I think are important. One was the launch of the State of the Regions report by Peter Brain from National Economics, and I have a copy here to make sure that we have available for other councillors, but is that the sort of thing that we can put in our libraries too, Mr CEO? This is incredibly important data in terms of how we're placed in the national economic setting, demographics, what are the issues that face us, what are the challenges, and also what are some of the solutions. It's very important. It was presented by Peter Brain, from National Economics, who I can only describe as a left-brain savant. And the graphs and tables in there were just incredible. Incredible data and very important for us, especially considering what we're talking about later in the meeting today. The second point I'm going to draw out is the CEO of Infrastructure Australia, Romilly Mathew, noted sagely around infrastructure investment being a long-term benefit to the community. And that was evidenced by the Infrastructure Australia audit. And she talked in particular about regional infrastructure and drew reference to the rate-capped, and she described agitated environments like New South Wales, where they have had rate capping for more than 20 years, probably even longer, Mr CEO, from memory, maybe 20 or 30 years. And the issues around the effects on facilities and infrastructure that never get caught up with in a rate-capped environment. And there's a lot of evidence around the hollowing out of communities, not just infrastructure, but social infrastructure, and removing the opportunities and the reasons for people to invest and live in an area when there might be not so much a job issue, but a skills issue. And that creates the likes of FIFO workers, and that leads to that further spiralling down of a local place, a local government area like ourselves. Very important to note that. The last thing that I'm going to draw out, and this is in particular in regard to young people and youth, we had a presentation from John Sigvason from Reykjavik University in Iceland. Some of you might have heard him on Radio National this morning. Incredible the work that they've done over the last 20 years in reducing drug, alcohol and other risk behaviours of young people in Iceland using a Planet Youth program, it's called. And they have a four-pronged focus on wellbeing, peer support, family commitment and extracurricular activities. And the effects have just been amazing in terms of the reduction in youth risk behaviour, promiscuity, smoking, drug and alcohol abuse, and the consequent benefits to the community about investing in that. And I was just delighted to hear this morning, again on Radio National, when Dr. John was interviewed, that there are about half a dozen or more local government organisations across Australia that are picking up that Planet Youth program to target that particular issue. It might be something we can consider in future. But my report, as I say, 4 or 5 pages, I will table and enable us to be read later. Thank you.
Thanks, Councillor Reeves. Councillor Roberts.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Unfortunately, I didn't bring anything for show and tell or any graphs, so I'll just I'll just highlight a couple of the events that I attended this month. The first one is the 2019 Regional Landcare Dinner. I attended the Regional Landcare Dinner, and a part of the night's proceedings was a viewing of a number of short films created by the various Landcare groups. The films portrayed excellent and invaluable work that is undertaken by volunteers across the community. Revegetation, creating wildlife corridors, removing invasive plants, and many other essential works not only has had an excellent effect on the landscape visually, but has also seen a significant increase in native and rare and threatened species. I'd like to commend the work that Landcare does and look forward to seeing the results in the future. Last night I attended the Champions for Change dinner with keynotes from Dr. Michael Flood. Champions for Change is an initiative that aims to raise awareness around family violence and assisting people to speak up against that kind of behaviour. The evening was well attended, and the presentation by Dr. Flood was very informative and encouraged some pertinent discussion with some excellent questions asked by the audience. The evening concluded with a stand-up comedy routine from Greg Fleet. You might know him from Neighbours and the Edinburgh International Comedy Festival and a whole bunch. His routine touched on some difficult issues, but there were a few shock gasps, but was mostly well received by the audience. He definitely went maybe a few areas that he thought might have been a little bit ironic, that maybe wasn't quite the audience that he was aiming for, but very good evening. Thank you.
Thanks, Councillor Roberts. Councillor Buckley.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. On the evening of the 20th of June, I had the pleasure to welcome Professor Bradley Turner, head of the Motor Neuron Disease Lab at the University of Melbourne, to a dinner and a presentation at the Bairnsdale RSL. An honoured guest was Tony Orchard, who lives nearby at Brunambra and has struggled with the disease for many years. Professor Turner's good news was that within 10 years we can be well on the way to a cure for MMD. The dinner and the presentation was hosted by the Inner Wheel Club of Bairnsdale, and good on them. Thank you, Madam Mayor.
Thanks, Councillor Buckley. Councillor Ellis.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I'll keep mine very short. Another busy month. A couple of points to make note of were I also attended the ELGA conference, and I won't take any of the glory away from Councillor Reid's great report, and just make note that I also was in attendance and took on board many of the matters discussed on a national basis. I attended the launch of the East Gippsland Business Awards, took part in a strategic visit around my hometown of Lakes Entrance, attended the Marina Consultative Committee meetings, attended the National Timber Councils Association meeting recently, and finally attended yesterday the Gippsland Climate Change Network and Disability Advisory Committee meetings held here in Bairnsdale. I'll supply a written report to the CEO's Executive Office. Thank you.
Thanks, Councillor Ellis. Councillor White.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. It's been quite a busy month for me as well, particularly as it's involved many changeover dinners for our service clubs, Rotary and Lions. One of those was Mitchell River Rotary, and Bernie Farquhar has taken on the president's role this year. And what was interesting is that they do pick a project that will be their aim for the year, and Bernie has chosen the water tower as a project. So he quickly looked at me, expecting some support from council, and I said, sorry Bernie, not ours, it's the water board's. But I wished him all the luck in the world with his endeavours to possibly get some murals painted on it. So good luck to him in that pursuit. Now, the on Friday, June the 14th, I attended the opening that Darren Chester opened stage 3 of Gippsland Rotary Centenary House down near the Traralgon Hospital, and that's quite a great facility. providing accommodation for those people who have loved ones who are ill in hospital but have to travel large distances, and this is accommodation at a very good rate for those families to be near their loved ones. Interestingly, what came from that is that much of the money has been provided by people in the Latrobe Valley and neighbouring shires, but East Gippsland, who has also provided some funding, has the 55% occupancy rate. So it's well used by East Gippslanders, obviously for the remote, the fact that we are remote from Traralgon Hospital, and it's great to see that that facility is benefiting our shire. On the same day or evening, travelled to Melbourne for the Aquatic and Recreation Victoria Awards, of which East Gippsland had 2 nominations. Unfortunately, Di, who's a trainer at Lakes Aquadome, was nominated but failed to win, unfortunately, but it was still great that we got that nomination. But the great news was that the Orbost Outdoor Pool picked up a prize for their initiative and what they'd done with regards to the pool up there. It was it needed some maintenance, which required emptying the pool in the middle of summer, in the middle of a very severe drought. And it was great to know that valuable staff showed some great initiative in, first of all, wondering why they should tip that water down the stormwater drains when the farmers were crying out for water. And so they thought outside the square and showed great initiative, got volunteers to come forward. They got the water tested to find it was safe to allow livestock to drink it, and then using volunteers and tankers, they proceeded to deliver that to as many farms as it would service. So that got them their nomination, and what was absolutely great on the night was that we did win that award. One of the judges caught up with me after the event, and there were hundreds of people there, and was explaining why East Gippsland had won, and it was for that compassion that was shown, because they were up against some pretty stiff competition, which was large organisations and who were doing a great job. But this Orbost Outdoor Pool, they just explained that was the clincher, was what they did and their thoughts for the rest of their community. It was almost time. We were late in the evening with that award, and it was almost time for them to announce the winners when Kelly said to me across the table, and I thought I'd been sent down as a chaperone for the staff. She said, "If we win, you'll need to make a speech." I said, "What speech?" She said, "Didn't they write one for you?" I said, "No." And yes, we got called out. So I said, "Okay, girls, up to the stage, you've got to come with me." So I got up and said a few words in front of all those hundreds of people. But I said, really, Kelly is the one with all the knowledge on this, and I think she should explain and speak to the crowd, which she reluctantly did. But what was so funny was that I stepped back away from the microphone, she stepped forward, and her knees were knocking together. She did a great job, but she was absolutely petrified. So I thought, well, you threw me under the bus. Well, it's my turn. So, and yes, and just lastly on the service clubs, the 17th of June, the Lindno Lions was one that's close to home for me, that they had their changeover dinner, and it was pleasing to note once again that their field day efforts had been most successful, and that they were quite appreciative of the fact that the gate was lowered as a result of the drought, the gate fee, and that so many people attended. They couldn't believe the attendance during such a bad season. So that's my lot for the month. Thank you.
Thanks, Councillor White. Councillor Peltz.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I'd just like to add to the table, whilst everyone was up in Canberra, I headed to Melbourne to the MAV Transport and Infrastructure meeting last week, and we had 2 successful opportunities rise from that, and it was with regards to unanimous support to write to the Minister of Transport to get the engineers of Regional Roads Victoria, and I think most of the community will be pleased to hear this, but we got up that we would write to the Minister in review, that Vic Roads would review their engineering designs for the roundabout specifications, and in particular we were hearing from people up in Swan Hill who'd had a roundabout built just over there, the causeway, near a bridge there that they're upgrading. And I said, well, how did you go with your roundabout? And he said, say no more. And I said, I'm hearing you, I know exactly what you mean, in particular the Stratford Bridge, the Stratford roundabout as you go over, just before you go over the bridge. Whilst it's not in our shire, most people travelling to Melbourne or for services further down that way have encountered it, and the initial westbound diversion is quite tight and overwhelming, and we felt it was a need for the Minister to address Vic Roads specifications, because when we actually chatted to Regional Roads Victoria about it, they all just said it was built to engineers' specifications. Well, in real light, the specifications aren't realistic to the road users, and we've asked the Minister on behalf of this group to have them look into it and to address it accordingly. Issues that arise from it are twisting vehicles, the main chassis are getting damaged underneath, there's possible rollover issues, and other than that, it was designed to slow the speed down. Yes, it's done that, but there's also other implications with regards to the final construction of it. So with that said, we also addressed them in regards to the wayside stops. Regional Roads Victoria has a policy that all exits from wayside stops need to be merged back onto the main carriageway at a right angle to the main road, the main carriageway, which we felt is not progressive. A more satisfactory use of this would be a progressive merging lane, given the fact that in many cases in the remote areas or regional areas, you're merging onto a road where cars are driving at 100 kilometres an hour, and if you're moving out onto a carriageway at 20 kilometres an hour, there's issues, safety issues with regards to having to slow traffic down and to actually get on the carriageway. So progressive merging lanes, exiting wayside stops has been requested on our community's behalf. And finally, the last thing that was brought up there was about the safety guards, and there was much discussion in regards to how it is affecting our community, and they also did state that with any of the guards that have been damaged, that the funding is actually coming out of road maintenance use to repair these guard railings, which was never discussed right at the start. Whilst they're an initiative from the TAC bucket of funding, the repairs to any of these guards which are being hit and damaged is actually coming out of the maintenance budget of Regional Roads Victoria, which then comes out of the slush fund that actually is resurfacing our roads. So it's not actually justified, and there's some issues there in that area. Other than that, bubbling around in the background, there's many reports being written in the moment, and we'll see a bit of a change in face by the end of the year. So thank you, Madam Mayor. That was all I had to discuss.
Thanks, Councillor Peltz. And I'll keep mine quite short. I was also in Elga with my fellow councillors and the CEO. I also attended the official opening of the 2019 snow season at Mount Hotham, and last Thursday I met with the Deputy Prime Minister, Michael McCormack, who was also acting Prime Minister at the time. He's the Minister for Infrastructure, Transport and Regional Development, and our local member, Darren Chester, with other council staff and mayors from Wellington and Latrobe Shire to talk about sort of Gippsland's infrastructure needs. Main items on the agenda were the duplication of the Princess Highway and the Gippsland Rail Line, regional airports, and connectivity and tourism. Specifically from East Gippsland's priorities around our Bairnsdale Airport strategy, our timber bridge and roads, and as well as our sporting and recreation facilities. And I'll leave it at that. Okay, 5.1 Point 1 is the adoption of the draft revised council plan 2017 to 2021. And I'll ask Mr. David Radford to come forward and present.
Thanks, Madam Mayor, and good afternoon, councillors. Councillors, the council plan expresses this council's broad vision for the East Gippsland Shire and gives a clear direction to the organisation about specific outcomes for the term of this council and how they will be funded. As well as having to develop a plan, council is also required under the Act to review its council plan each year to determine if it requires any adjustment. As councillors will recall, a revision process was commenced earlier this year and has involved workshops with council, senior officers and of course a community consultation process. As a result of the public consultation process, 9 submissions were received, and upon review by council officers, these submissions were deemed to be more aligned with the revised draft budget and as such were considered by the Committee of Council in accordance with the Section 223 of the Act. So due to no direct submissions being received regarding the council plan revision, no further changes were recommended by the council committee. So following the review and public consultation process, council is now in a position to consider adopting these documents, the council plan and the strategic resource plan. Councillors, you have some recommendations before you. I'm happy to answer any questions.
Thanks, Mr. Radford. Are there any questions, councillors?
Yes, Madam
Councillor
Mayor.
Buckley.
I would like to be able to get a small retraction in one paragraph out of this. So how do I go about that? Can I do it with moving a motion to accept the recommendation with a retraction of paragraph 1? What's the procedure?
Which paragraph are you referring to?
In our vision of East Gippsland, I'm referring to East Gippsland is the most livable region in Australia. And anyway, one of our councillors just mentioned before that our attendance to universities in this area are largely down, largely caused by affordability. And so it's obviously, that's you mightn't like to call it a lie, but it's definitely a fib. And I'd like that removed. So I'd like to go know the procedure that I must take.
Mr. Radford.
Through you, Madam Mayor, and with respect, Councillor Buckley, the vision as well as the overall content of the document, the vision that was initially developed in the council plan that was adopted by this council back in 2017 was part of the revision process earlier this year. So councillors certainly had the opportunity at that point to make any adjustments to the vision.
Well, I'm afraid under those circumstances, well, why is it put before us now if it's already been approved? Yeah.
Councillor Buckley, through you, Madam Mayor, Councillor Buckley, the vision hasn't changed since the council plan was developed in 2017, and annually we've been through this process as a requirement of the Act to adjust not only the council's vision, but any of the strategic objectives contained within the document. Considering that the workshopping process, I believe, commenced in February this year, it would be my observation that there's been ample opportunity to look at the vision.
Well, thank you, Mr. Radford, but under those circumstances, I'm afraid I won't be able to support it. Thank you.
Councillor Ellis, did you have a question?
No, I think Mr. Radford's and I've provided the assistance I was going to offer you, Madam Mayor.
Any further questions?
Happy to move it.
Thanks, Councillor Peltz. Do I have a seconder? Thanks, Councillor Reeves. Councillor Peltz, do you wish to speak to the motion?
This document is the base of council. Basically, it's a guideline of what we need to stick to. And with regards to Councillor Buckley's comments, I think, you know, we have, with reiterating Mr. Radford's comments, we have had a lot of time working on this, and you'll be able to change it come this time next year if you so wish to do so, the wording, but at the last minute, at this late hour, it's probably unsuitable, and I'd be surprised if you got support around the table, but you may do. And yeah, it's something that is like the Bible for council, and it has all of our ins and outs in it. So I commend the staff, and I thank Mr Radford for his work on this document and his staff as well. Thank you.
Thanks, Councillor Peltz. Councillor Reeves, do you wish to speak?
Yeah, thanks, Mayor. Thanks, councillors. Mr Radford, thank you for your work over a number of years and on this particular document today. I think it's most appropriate that our vision is to be the most livable region in Australia. I think that's an aspirational statement. It's where we aim for, it's what we want to be. We understand that there are some challenges around university completion, school attendance, jobs, and goodness only knows what else are the challenges. But unless we have a vision, unless we can close our eyes and envisage what we want to be in the future, we're never going to have that place to go to. And the council plan is the document that takes us to that place, provides a structure to take us on that journey to that place. The other transactional matters that we'll discuss today are how we take those steps to scaffold our way along that journey to that vision. But it's absolutely appropriate that we have a vision to be the most livable region in Australia. And I commend this and hope you all support it.
Thanks, Councillor Reeves. Are there any further speakers? Speakers
Have I
against?
the right of reply?
You can speak against the motion.
Yeah, I'm speaking against it then, thank you. As I said before, I covered it briefly before, but it's as simple as that. We shouldn't put out stuff that's not true. And, well, I suppose in speaking against it, that's my strong logic. So, thank you, Madam Mayor.
Thanks, Councillor Buckley. Further speakers for? Against? Councillor Peltz, do you wish to have a right of reply?
Oh yes, I'd just like to say I concur with my fellow colleague Councillor Reeves here. To have a vision statement and a direction is vitally important to our community and also to the staff here that runs the operation in council. I'd just like to say again and reiterate over the 2 years since this council's been sitting, we're now in our third year. We came up with this probably 3 years ago, and I think at that stage maybe there should have been some tweaking. And like I said before, there'll be, if you wish to tweak the wording, Councillor Buckley, come January, February, March this next year, 2020, there'll be opportunity for that. But this is our guidepost, and basically the budget forms the background to this guiding post. So with that said, again, Mr Radford, to you and your diligent staff committed to delivering this every year to us, you've done a sensational job, and I'd like to thank you on behalf of this council.
Thanks, Councillor Peltz. I put the motion to you. All those in favour? Against? Motion carried 7-1. Item 5.1.2, adoption of revised draft council budget. Ms Liz Collins.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. The revised draft budget 2019-20 presented to this meeting of Council has been prepared in accordance with the requirements of the Local Government Act 1989 and the Local Government Planning and Reporting Regulations 2014. The revised draft budget adopted by Council on the 7th of May 2019 for releasing for public submissions has been amended to take into account a number of items that were unknown at that time. A list of the amendments has been attached to the Council report, which provides details of these changes. One of the most significant amendments relates to the advance payment of $7.751 million of the 2019-20 Victoria Grants Commission allocation, which has now been paid in the 2018-19 year and is now included in the forecast operating result for the 2018-19 year. This has increased the forecast surplus in the 18-19 year, and together with other forecast changes now estimates the operating surplus in the current year to be approximately $11.1 million, and the surplus that is now forecast in the revised draft budget before you for the 1920 year will be reduced to $7.001 million. Other material changes relate to the Capital Works program, where Council received advice of fixing country roads funding and a number of other capital grants. A review of the expected capital works and landfill rehabilitation programs carry forwards for incomplete works from the 18-19 program was also undertaken, and the capital works and landfill rehabilitation programs were amended by just over $5 million as a result of that review. The timing of funding for some projects, together with required approvals for landfill rehabilitation projects, has seen the expected delivery of a number of projects now being moved into the 2019-20 year. Other amendments were made to the 2018-19 operating forecast to account for updated advice on the timing of when some capital grant funding would be received, and this, together with other minor amendments, accounted for the balance of the changes to both the 2018-19 forecast results and the 2019-20 budget. Also to note is that following consideration by a committee of council of the 46 budget submissions received, no recommendations for amendment of the revised draft budget were made by the committee. A summary of the budget submissions and the recommendations of the committee of council are included as an appendix to this report. Further, there was one budget submission that had not been included in the budget submission hearing, and that has been circulated to committee members for their consideration. The submission related to a suggestion that council allocate funds specifically for a yearly planting of trees. That consideration has recommended no amendment to the revised draft budget 1920. The budget before council this afternoon supports maintaining and improving services and infrastructure, as well as delivering projects and services that are valued by our community, all within the confines of the rate increase of 2.5% on base rates and municipal charge mandated by the Victorian Government. The budget estimates that an operating surplus of $7.001 million will be achieved for the 2019-20 year. When taking into account one-off capital income items, it is expected that an adjusted underlying deficit of $2.457 million will result due to the $7.7 million of the advance payment of the 1920 Grants Commission. If the Victorian Grants Commission payment had been received in the year to which it relates, which is the 1920 year, rather than in advance, an adjusted underlying surplus of $5.294 million would have resulted. The underlying surplus is a significant measure of Council's ability to manage and deliver services within the confines of income sources that will continue consistently from year to year. Council seeks to achieve an underlying surplus of at least $1 million every year, and this result is therefore meeting this important financial sustainability measure. Further, when taking a longer-term view of operating surpluses and underlying surpluses estimated for the 4 years of the Strategic Resource Plan, all of the other 3 years, being 2021 to 22-23, are expected to show an operating surplus and an underlying operating surplus. In terms of the capital and major works, a significant program of capital works totalling $45.626 million is proposed for 2019-20, with an average capital works program over the next 4 years being $35.7 million. Major landfill rehabilitation projects are also planned over the coming 4 years, totalling $12.2 million, with an average of just over $3 million each year. Council's end-of-year cash position is expected to average approximately $17.5 million over the 4 years of the Strategic Resource Plan. After taking into consideration the amount of cash that is required to be held to fund day-to-day operations of council and amounts held in statutory reserves, the unrestricted cash available shows that it will meet council's day-to-day cash requirements, as well as being able to plan for future major project cash requirements, such as the Raymond Island ferry replacement. Councillors, the budget report presented today includes a number of recommendations in relation to the adoption of the budget for council's consideration. Thank you, Madam Mayor.
Thanks, Ms Collins. Questions? Councillor Peltz.
Yes, Ms Collins, would you mind explaining the gradual reduction in the municipal charge that this council's trying to achieve? If you could explain that, it'd be good, please. Thank you. It's a highlight.
Thank you, Councillor Pells. The revised draft budget proposes that the municipal charge be reduced from what was 18% of our total rates of municipal charge down to 14% of our total rates of municipal charge. And what that does, it redistributes the reduction being raised from the municipal charge to the general rates that are calculated. So that then creates a movement from rate in the dollar as opposed to the fixed charge.
And can I just have a follow-up with regards to this council's objective is to reduce it again in the next financial year to a 10% charge, a 10% municipal charge?
Any further change in the municipal charge will be subject to obviously council's direction when we get to that stage in the planning for the 19-20-21 budget.
Further questions, councillors? Councillor Rotino.
I haven't got any questions. I was ready to move, but I see there's questions.
Councillor Roberts.
I'd like to please move an alternative motion. Would you like me to read it? Thank you, Madam Mayor. My alternative motion that I put before Council today is that Council, 1, not adopt the draft budget 1920 as presented, and 2, instruct officers to recast the draft budget to reflect the amount to be raised from rates and municipal charges in the 1920 budget remain at the 18-19 level, rather than be increased by 2.5% as currently proposed.
Do we have a second?
I'll second that.
Thanks, Councillor Buckley. Do you wish to further speak to your motion, Councillor Roberts?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. When I stood for council in 2016, one of my key election commitments was to advocate for lower rates. Challenging the status quo is not often an easy task, with today being no exception. However, it's not my job to take the easy route. It's my job to represent the community. Compounding rate increases have been a long-time concern of ratepayers. With the recent Section 223 hearing on the draft budget, it was made very clear to me that the issue of rate rise is more important than ever. With the ongoing effects of drought, loss of industry, struggling retailers, the rate of inflation at a mere 1.3%, and our unemployment rate 38% higher than the state average, how is it acceptable that we increase the rates by 2.5%? To me, 2.5% appears to be merely an arbitrary figure handed down by the state government, which has no real grounding with our community. The total raised by rates and municipal charge in the proposed 1920 budget is $50.3 million. If Council were to resolve not to apply the 2.5% rate increase, freezing the rate to the 18-19 level, it becomes an immediate saving of $1.25 million to the community. This would require Council to budget for only 1.3% less total income. The community is doing it hard, and we need to adjust our spending accordingly instead of constantly increasing the rates by the maximum allowable amount every single year. I urge you to support the alternative motion presented before you. Thank you.
Councillor Buckley, do you wish to speak to the motion?
Yeah, thank you, Madam Mayor. When local government was first set up, it was based on rates levied to pay for services to properties like rubbish and roads. But over this time it has changed. No longer are the rates just a service to property, but a growing tax on things that should be funded through state and federal taxes. Since amalgamation, rates have increased by way beyond people's income growth. It became such an issue that the government had to step in to cap increases. But even now, we do not have to always tax to the maximum allowed. Year by year, the increases keep compounding. There are already gross inequities, with farmers' rates based on the valuation of potential property sales, not income. And to have enough paddocks to farm, multiple titles are needed, resulting in huge rate bills. Because of this, communities are shrinking as smaller farms are unviable. Families sell out or children do not carry on. Rates affect everybody, impact on renters, pensioners and businesses. I believe we need a new way of looking at shire operations with more careful spending and not expect an ever-increasing budget. People criticise what they consider the Shire's extravagant use of their money. The huge cost projections in terms of capital works, interstate trips, overuse of consultants and lawyers in particular, too much spin and litigation. We must go back to basics, genuinely engage with our people, listen to them, and now they request a freeze on rates. Thank you, Madam Mayor.
Thanks, Councillor Buckley. Are there any further speakers? Speaker 4. Thanks, Councillor White.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I also support this motion, or this alternative motion. My discussions around the size of this organisation and the budget that we have, and we are looking to a little over 1% reduction in its total budget. And the argument's been, what services are we going to cut? Who's going to miss out? I disagree, and I feel that little over 1% could be enabled by just looking at the efficiency of this organisation and finding ways to do things better at less. Now, it's okay to frown at my discussion, but I think it's logical that we can achieve this, or could achieve what we are aiming for, and that is to show some relief to the citizens of our Shire, particularly as in our council plan we have said that our job is to look after our communities, and I feel that this is a way that we can help our communities. Thank you.
Any further speakers? Councillor Ellis.
I'm not ready to speak to the motion or against the motion at the moment, Madam Mayor, but I was hoping to be able to ask a few questions because we've been taken a bit by surprise in terms of the rapidity of the introduction of the alternate motion. I know it was coming, but I wanted to ask a couple of questions of Ms Collins in relation to the effects of and impacts into the longer term of this particular motion. I would like to get an understanding of certain matters so as I can make a clearer decision than what I have made in relation to the matter.
I'll allow a question to Ms Collins. Councillor Ellis.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Ms Collins, taking on Councillor Roberts' point that we've got a savings of $1.3 million per year, which on our gross budget is only about 1.3%, so it's quite small. But is that a compounding and or accumulated cost to council, so that over the 10-year period of our long-term budget, this savings will accumulate to $12 million or more? Am I reading that right?
Thank you, Councillor Ellis. If there was no corresponding reduction in expenditure, and it was only a reduction in the amount of rates to be raised, yes, then the compounding impact of that over 10 years would be over $12 million in terms of out of the cash.
Another things that I've got. Reverting back to the budget of 2018-2019, and taking into account the recommendation before us prior to the alternative motion being tabled, there was a recommendation to provide farmers with a 17.5% discount compared to the average landholder in their terms of their rate, and that in fact was approximately 50% cheaper than any other business operator in the country. 55%, sorry. If the alternate motion is adopted, will we revert back to the situation we had last year where the farmers will only effectively have a 10% discount on the general rate that normal mums and dads pay and 50% to other businesses, or do they revert back to that higher discount that was initially tabled?
Councillor Ellis, that would certainly be up to council to make that decision in terms of if the budget had to be recast, what the differential rates may be for commercial, industrial and the farming properties. Noting that the 2019-20 year would be using the new valuations, which, as we know, had a significantly greater increase in the farming sector than the other two sectors of council. So absolutely up to council, would have to relook at all of that again.
Further. And so, well, just to pick up on that, so what you're saying is that the farming community's properties increased in value at a higher rate than residential and commercial properties across the state, and that was valued by the state Attorney General's Department.
The increase in valuations for the farming sector, the percentage increase overall, was a greater percentage than for residential and commercial industrial properties, and those valuations are undertaken by the Valuer General Victoria, yes.
These questions, but it's important that we all understand where we're going with this. Another part of that, this alternative motion is, does that impact upon the status of the recommended increase in rate in fees and charges of 2.5%? Do those charges remain in place?
Once again, that certainly would be up to council if we were reviewing the budget again, but at this stage the motion appears just to relate to the rates and not to the proposed increase to fees and charges as per the revised budget.
Thanks, Councillor Ellis. Councillor Peltz, did you have a question?
Yeah, just to follow up, if Councillor Roberts' motion is not supported, what opportunity has our community got to voice their opinion with regards to the excessive farm increase rate by the Valuer General? What opportunities is available to our community to resolve the costing of their properties?
Every year all ratepayers have an opportunity to lodge an objection to their valuation if they believe that it is not correct. And once the valuation and rate notices are sent out, there's 60 days from the date of that notice for ratepayers to lodge those objections and to be considered if they believe they're incorrect.
So does that objection come through to council? Do they object to council for the valuation of their rate?
the valuation objections are dealt with by the Valuer General, but the initial inquiry and forms will be lodged through council and then passed on through to the Valuer General and or his contractor who is undertaking the valuations.
Okay. Are there any further speakers for or against the motion? No, I'll put the motion to you. All those in favour? All those against? Motion is lost, 3-5. We now deal with the motion, the recommendation that is on the table. Councillor Rotino.
Move the motion.
Thank you. Do I have a seconder? Thanks, Councillor Reeves. Do you wish to speak to the motion, Councillor Rotino?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I'd like to acknowledge the work that Liz Collins and the finance team have done with this. There's been a lot of iterations, a lot of calculations, a lot of assumptions challenged and so on. The budget's been framed to ensure the organisation is appropriately resourced to deliver the works, services and initiatives set out in the revised Council Plan 2017-21. There's been a great deal of local media over the recent weeks about the proposed rate increases for the 2019-20 period. In framing the budget, we were very aware of the difficulties being experienced by the rural sector because of the current drought and the flow-on impacts that it's also having to other businesses in our region. Our budget today proposes that the differential rate for farm class of properties be reduced from 90% last year in the general rate to 82.5% this year in the general rate, effectively a 17.5% discount. The differential rate for the commercial industrial class of properties is proposed to decrease from 145% of the general rate to 143% of the general rate. Through this use of differential rates, there will be a rates and municipal charge increase of approximately 2.5% for each of the class property. Specifically, there will be an increase from the 2018-19 total rates and charges of 2.52% for residential properties, 2.39% for commercial industrial, and 2.5% for farming properties. The average increase of the rates and municipal charge across the rating categories is 2.5%, which is in line with Victorian Government's rates cap. Council believes rates must increase by this amount to ensure that we can continue to deliver the services that our community have now and provide for a sustainable future. This budget delivers a significant capital works program of $45.6 million, which has a strong focus on the renewal of East Gippsland's considerable infrastructure. These items include $13.8 million for roads projects, $3.7 million for bridges, $5.1 million to be spent on parks projects, including a number of streetscapes. 2.4 million is planned for connecting pathways from Eastwood through to Lucknow and stage 1 of the Omeo mountain bike trails. 1.4 million is planned to be spent on Lake Central seawall reconstruction stage 2. $750,000 will be spent at Jemmy's Point stage 2. $3.6 million for waste projects and $5.3 million for landfill rehabilitation projects. To ensure Council has some funds in reserve to respond to unexpected events, including disasters and other contingencies, operating surpluses are expected in all years. However, in the 2019-20 year, when the advance payment of $7.7 million of the 2019-20 Victorian Grants Commission allocation has been taken into account, it is expected that there will be an underlying deficit of $2.457 million. And it's always the underlying either surplus or deficit that's an important measure of the operational financial performance, as it negates the impact of one-off capital income. For all other years of the Strategic Resource Plan estimates an underlying surplus. Councillors, I believe the revised budget for 2019-20 is responsible, equitable in the best long-term interests of East Gippsland and its community. I encourage you to support its adoption on this basis. Thank you.
Thanks, Councillor Rotino. Councillor Reeves, do you wish to speak?
Well, firstly, I'd just like to acknowledge that, Councillor Roberts, you stood on your convictions and you had a go, and that should be acknowledged, and we respect you for that. However, I'm happy and delighted to support this budget and this recommendation. Now, this budget aspires to deliver much of the good, persistent and consistent leadership that has characterised the intentions of this council's plan for the last numbers of years. Now, there's no doubt there's challenges, councillors and community members who are here, but these are shared by most rural shires across Victoria and Australia. And we've heard resoundingly that there is stress in aspects of the primary production sector. Just remember, the major tax revenue raiser in Australia is the federal government, not local government, the federal government. And the major investor in regional Australia is local government. And it's in collaboration with the federal government that we do that investment. That's critical. And we receive that money through federal assistance grants. Now, we note that the rate take from the farm sector is not insignificant, but it represents about 5% of the total rate income and the overall income in our shire. However, what the rate strategy does is give concessions to the farm sector, who now benefit from about 50% reduction compared to the other commercial sectors in the shire. 55 is at Councillor Peltz. We've heard you, and this, we believe, is a responsible response using the levers that are available to us, and they are using the differential rate strategy, and this has flattened the rate burden across the shire. Just remember too that regular households of the shire carry the major rate burden. That is, the residential rate take has accepted really to support farmers by taking an increase that is spread across the shire. I'm sure Councillor Ellis, you'll mention the pensioners and the self-funded retirees who do it tough when interest rates are low like they are now. But it's also the residential workers who are the people of our shire who struggle. The workers and the mortgagees pay rates too. They're the workers, the teachers, the nurses, the police officers, business owners, the push bike riders, the pub workers, the builders, plumbers, government workers, fishers, divers, drivers and transport workers. We all want a discount, but we all want services as well. That's the challenge of the balance that we have to make decisions on. There's no doubt that we all want those rate cuts, but it's hard to hear what we are being asked to cut spending on if we do have a rate cut. And I think that this council will take on board that and will work responsibly in the next 12 months to work out where we can continue to save money without reducing services. Because we don't want to close an Orbost swimming pool or reduce the services at Marlow Airfield for those care flights and ambulances, or cut the planning department staff, because that will affect also the approval time for applications. And we don't want to cut the car parks crew, do we? Or halve the rangers and then forget the dog collection, or cut the tip times, or the community events funding, or the road repairs. They're all part of the services which are part of local government. We can't have rate cuts and cut and improve services. And after 4 days in Canberra, it's clear and apparent that investment is the key. To let our critical infrastructure, both physical and human, lag is the travesty for the future. This budget is a budget that balances the challenges of revenue raising, service provision, infrastructure renewal and capital construction, among many others. And I'm happy, no, I'm actually delighted to support it and urge the other councillors to do the same.
Thanks, Councillor Reeves. Are there any speakers against? Councillor Buckley.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. We as local government are little more than a tax collection agency on behalf of the state government. This is our only opportunity to express our opinion in relation to the greater powers. And there's no way this can be turned around now, I wouldn't think, but I want to remind you of that we should attempt to retain some autonomy. Thank you, Madam Mayor.
Thanks, Councillor Buckley. Speakers for? Councillor Peltz.
Yes, I'm happy to, or pleased to be supporting the current motion that's been put to the table. I have to say, in no disrespect to our community, we have worked diligently on this since November last year, and we've heard the cries of the community in regards to the hardships that they're going through. We thank you all for your submissions and for coming to the table and talking to us about what your requirements are. And I have to say, whilst we're unable to entertain the vast part of it at this stage, we have made an attempt to address some of the burden, the tax burden or the rate burden in regards to dispersing the percentage. And I think this council has been successful. We've changed it in response since the field days. We've changed the original draft budget to address what we have now, and I think it's a responsive budget collectively from the information that the community has given to the councillors and the council group as a whole. And I'd like that to be noted specifically because it's not that we can, you know, just because you decide this year you want a 50% rate freeze and you want a rate freeze and you want a 50% reduction, you know, how does council ever respond or bounce back from that? It's actually not acceptable to be looking at that, and it's also irresponsible for us to be entertaining that. But we have given you what we feel is reasonable, and it's actually something that the state government has said to us when we attended the Rural Council Summit in April, that the Labor state government will be reviewing rate charges and how the whole rate system is set up within the next 12 months, and that came from Graham Emerson himself. So with that in mind, we will take what you've delivered to us respectfully, and we will use it as a submission towards their review, and as a council group we will do the utmost to represent you at that level. So with that in mind, I want to thank you all, and I think this is a responsible budget in response to our current economic situation. Thank you.
Thanks, Councillor Peltz. Speakers for, Councillor Ellis.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. This has undoubtedly been the most difficult of all budgets I've experienced to date in my time as a councillor. The word autonomy was used by Councillor Buckley, and I appreciate him for reminding me of the importance of local government in this as a standalone level of government. This budget has been affected negatively by impacts from outside our level of government. We've seen interference from lobby groups. We've seen interference from perhaps higher levels of government. The distraught that's come on through rate capping and the need to impose continual increases in rates comes from the higher sectors of government. I was reminded again whilst at the ELGA conference of the fact that once upon a time local government was funded by 1% of the gross national product of our country. That figure now is down to about 0.55%, which means that we as a community have to look after ourselves, and at times it's not palatable to have to face this reality. Some of the arguments that come through have led to what I was wrestled with difficulty, and that was a principle of entitlement, and that was a part of the argument that made it difficult for me to make a decision in this matter. I was cognizant of the fact that we received as a council a petition of 500 signatures. That is a message to council to be better money managers, and I've taken that on board. We have workshopped this budget for the last 6 months, and it's only in the last month or so, or six weeks, that we've had more intense lobbying come onto us. I don't envy the Mayor and the CEO for some of the approaches that they've received in this process. I can give you an undertaking that as a councillor, I will continue to work to represent members of the community out in our wider area. I do particularly am concerned about the inability council seems to have of protecting our pensioners and people on fixed incomes. I thank Councillor Rees for many of his words in relation to the makeup of our community, because they need representation too. We can't singularly focus on one group. I have vast empathy for the farming community, and I don't wish to enter into that discussion on entitlement, but I just believe that we all should look for the best for all of our community, and that includes farmers, pensioners and tradesmen and other people that make up our community. In concluding, I commend the budget in the sense that it's practical. One of the issues that makes me support this is that if we were to support the failed amended motion, we would end up with a figure of $12.5 million, which we would have to find. That's a responsibility for some other council to wrestle with, and I would not want to impose that difficulty on a future council that would have to go cap in hand to perhaps an unsympathetic state government and ask for a 15% rate rise to meet the demands of any particular issue that comes forward. We have a surplus for good reason, and it's been well explained by Ms Collins. The surplus helps us meet the uniqueness of our particular shire, and that is that if we are to face particular natural disasters, whether it be fire, flood or other horror, we will be able as an organisation to fund actions to meet that from those cash reserves. They are there for a purpose. Councillors, this is a responsible budget. It's subject to review by us as managers over the next 12 months, and I suggest that next year we will not need to have such a difficult decision-making process. Thank you.
Thanks, Councillor Ellis. Speakers against? Councillor White.
I would just like to say something briefly about those who have spoken for this budget. They've discussed at length the position that our council is in and our community's in, and talking about how everyone's doing it tough, and yet here we are sitting around and about to make it tougher by asking for more money, and that is why I've supported Councillor Roberts' defeated motion. Thank you.
Any further speakers? Councillor Rotino, do you wish to have a right of reply?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Look, just quickly, within the framework that our organisation operates in, at this time I believe this is a responsible and equitable budget. I'd like to thank the community that's come out today. I'd like to also thank them for the hearing submissions. There's a lot of documentation that they've poured over the budgets and the council plan. I'd like to encourage other people within our community to read the budget document in conjunction with the council plan. Read these two strategic documents to give the reader an idea and understanding of the multitude of works and services and projects that council delivers and what is planned for the future. I'd also like to just quickly say, if this motion is supported, that I'd like to foreshadow a motion around requesting the Chief Executive Officer and the operations, setting them an objective to achieving an ongoing net saving of $1.5 million for the 2019-20 financial year, and report back to Council by the 30th of September with a recommendation on how this outcome can be achieved. But as I say, that's a foreshadowed motion, Madam Mayor.
Thanks, Councillor Rotino. I'll put the motion to you. All those in favour? All those against? Motion is carried 5-3. Okay, Councillor Rotino, do you wish to speak to your foreshadowed motion?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I'd like to request that Council's Chief Executive Officer review the organisation's operations with the objective of achieving an ongoing net saving of $1.5 million for the 2019-20 financial year, and that 2, reports back to Council by the 30th of September 2019 with a recommendation on how this outcome can be achieved.
Yep. We'll just get the motion up on the screen to review.
It's the 1920 year.
21.
Madam Mayor, a point of order. Shouldn't we be, if we wish to go on like this, whispering and carrying on, shouldn't we declare a...
We're just waiting for the motion to be put up on the screen so that everyone can read it. The foreshadowed motion, we're just waiting to be put up onto the screen so that everyone can see what was said.
Thank you.
Councillor Attino, is that the motion that you moved?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Yes, that does reflect my intent. I'll be happy to discuss it further if I get a seconder.
Thanks, Councillor Peltz. Councillor Attino, do you wish to speak further?
Yeah, Madam Mayor, I'd like to firstly commend the CEO in his first 6 months with our organisation, and he's made some significant organisational restructure changes, and I believe that this challenge just sits with how we're setting up the organisation to better serve our community. Thank you.
Thanks, Councillor Attino. Councillor Peltz?
Yes, to concur with my colleagues here, Councillor Attino, I believe that our CEO is putting in some great framework. He's listening to us in hand with the community, and this motion is actually a response to what we're hearing from our community today. Whilst we were unable to address it in the previous motion, this actually is a move forward on how we can address their issues in the next financial year. So I believe this is an active response to the community's request, and I believe that our CEO, who's doing a great job, we believe he's actually up to it and he'll be able to get these figures more in tangent for us. Thank you.
Thanks, Councillor Peltz. Are there further speakers for?
Thank you.
Councillor Buckley?
Well, not necessarily. It's a question for Councillor Rotino. Why are we doing this? Isn't the CEO already doing all this? Why do we have to put an exact figure on it? It's already done. We're just wasting council's time here with extra stuff that's quite obviously being done, if you ask me, because I think the CEO is well worth his salt. He's done a great job since he's been here, and I can't see the need for this. Thank you. That doesn't mean to say I won't support it, though, but...
Councillor Ellis.
Thank you.
I just want to speak against the motion. I feel this is a bit of show pony, and I'm sorry, Joe, to say that, but if we need to do this and instruct the CEO to do something that we have workshop for, then what was the point of rejecting Councillor Roberts' 1.3 savings? Why couldn't we not do this as a matter of course? This is the twist when we do these sort of rushed sort of motions. We would be looking as a council to make those savings regardless, and I pick up on what Councillor Buckley has said. That is, I would expect the CEO and his executive team to be working to provide council with the best financial management possible for this council. Council, as I said in my words earlier, have been listening to the community and am well aware of the need to manage financially well into the future. This really does not achieve anything. It's an expectation that I would expect every one of us to work to regardless of any motion. So I can't support this. Thank you.
Any further speakers? Councillor Reeves.
Look, I'm happy to speak to it. I think that there are some sage words that have been said, and Councillor Ellis, as much as anybody has said, a positive contribution. However, I don't mind targets. I don't mind setting targets so they're really specific, they're clear, you know, and they're timely as well. I think this is not a bad thing to do. It gives us, in the next budget period, the opportunity to look for those savings. And that could mean that this time next year, when we're setting this budget, we can have these vigorous discussions about rate levels, because we're looking at perhaps an environment where there have been some identified potential savings. So I think it's not a bad idea to do this. You know, I agree. I'm not a person to have these spontaneous motions as such, but I think this one does set a specific target for the CEO, and for us, it holds us accountable. So I'm happy to support it.
Thanks, Councillor Reeves. Any further speakers? Mr. CEO.
Through you, Madam Mayor, councillors, thank you for the compliments. I certainly can't take all those. I work with great staff, and they should be recognised as part of that as well. I would ask that I'm certainly not against anything like this. Happy to meet councils and community expectations around those sort of financial management targets. What I would ask is perhaps a little bit more time, and for two reasons. One is because of the way our meeting cycle works. Actually, September meeting would mean that I've got a month, 6 weeks, give or take, to actually get that work done and to do it well. I'm not sure that's significant enough time when we've also got a whole range of other things that are happening across the organisation. And that's the second item, is that I'm in the process of recruiting a new executive team, as some people would know, and this is right sort of in there. It would be essentially very early days for them. I'm just wondering if we want to get the best out of that process, perhaps a couple of extra months or to the end of the year may actually provide a better outcome that we could feed then into next year's budget process.
Yeah, Councillor White.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. This is to you, Mr. CEO. I would have been thinking that although this is a commendable motion, but would you have not been working towards this outcome anyway without being held to a motion at this meeting, at this time, that you would have been working towards these savings? And I think, as you rightly say, with looking to get a new executive team, they would form an integral part of how you go about getting these savings.
Through you, Madam Chair. This motion that is proposed certainly sets a very specific target to meet. I have a clear goal and responsibility around making sure that we are financially sustainable. Often people talk about efficiencies, but you also need to make sure that you remain effective. So I would certainly be working towards financial sustainability and making sure we find savings wherever possible. And I think it is worth noting, and this sometimes gets lost in the debate, and it's a very passionate debate, the materials budgets for council programs don't go up from year to year unless they are required to under contracts or there is an external influence on it. So like utility charges, they have to go up. But on the whole, our program dollars in terms of the delivery, they stay at zero. So we have effectively over time been having a zero increase. So effectively, you could argue a net decrease in program dollars over time. So, you know, it is my responsibility and staff's responsibility to manage our budgets well and find savings wherever we can, and we do that. So yes, I would, is the short answer. On the other hand, this sets a very clear target and very clear time frame.
Thanks, Mr CEO. Councillor Retainer, did you have a question?
Question to the seconder. If she's happy, I'd like to change the date to 30th of December or December 2019. No, December, thanks.
Okay. Are there any further speakers? No? Do you wish to have a right of reply, Councillor Retainer?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I must admit I'm somewhat amused by Councillor Ellis's comments that I may have done this as some sort of special acknowledgement, or I just can't believe those comments at all. Really, tell you the truth, Councillor Ellis, given that I only became aware of this Councillor Roberts' amendment several hours ago, to suggest that I may have been grandstanding is almost laughable. What gets measured gets done. I'm happy. I accept all the comments that our CEO may be doing this stuff, and I agree that he probably is. But I've seen so many times where it's not measured, it doesn't get done. So to have an amount and a time frame there actually does it in a way that's more of a strategic approach rather than an ad hoc approach. Finding out today about this other amendment, and it also gives us opportunity to talk to our community. Because if we find there might be some services that we want to challenge, it gives us time to talk to our community. Thank you, Madam Mayor.
Thanks, Councillor Retainer. I'll put the motion to you. All those in favour? All those against? Councillor Ellis? Yeah, thank you. Motion carried 6-2. Item 5.1.3, Draft Local Law Number 1, Procedures for Council Meetings, Approval for Public Consultation. Mr. Stephen Columbus.
Thank you, Madam Mayor and Councillors. This report obviously seeks Council's approval to commence the statutory processes required to set in place draft revised Local Law Number 1 procedures for council meetings. Specifically, it's asking you to give... Oh, sorry, I thought I was. This report seeks Council's approval to commence the statutory processes required to set in place draft revised Local Law Number 1. Specifically, it is asking Council to put in place a Section 223 procedure of public consultation and to also give public notice of its intention to make the Local Law Number 1.
Thanks, Mr. Columbus. Are there any questions from councillors? Councillor Peltz.
With with regards to this, just curious as to whether there's opportunity for more grant funding for us to be able to retain for home care services?
This is not that item. This is the draft local law.
Oh, have I? Oh, I'm sorry, I'm on the wrong boat.
No, there's not.
Any questions, councillors? If not, I'll put the motion to you. Oh, Anita Mover, sorry. Thanks, Councillor Rotino. Thanks, Councillor White, sorry. Moving ahead. Speakers? Councillor Roberts.
While I generally agree with the amendments to local law, there is one area that that's something that doesn't quite sit with me as comfortably as the rest, and that's the final point on page 25 that confirms that this chair manages all aspects of the request to speak on an agenda item, and mainly the point being that the speakers will be allowed between 3 and 5 minutes. I raised this when we were workshopping this, and I feel that maybe that's a little bit restrictive and prevents us from being able to have a dynamic meeting if the chair wishes to extend that greater than 5 minutes. So that's my only concern about this, and I think during the section 223 process, if the community tends to agree with that fact, that they should form a submission and have it be heard at the 223. So I don't think I'll be able to support the recommendation based on those, but it's more of a moral, no, sorry, poor choice of words. It's more of a bad feeling objection, not so much to the motion itself, but to that specific item. So thank you.
Speakers for or against?
I'd like to support Councillor Roberts, particularly on his comment of moral, because if he got a bad feeling, that is a moral thing. So thank you, Councillor Roberts.
Councillor Reeves.
I'm happy to speak in favour of the motion. This has been workshopped by the councillors for many, many weeks now, and let's get it out there to the community and get that feedback. In terms of the speaking time, it begs the question to me, that old saying about sorry for writing a long letter. If I had more time, I would have written a short one.
Thanks, Councillor Reeves. And I think we'll find our neighbours actually have capped at 3-minute speaking times, Wellington, Bawbaw and Latrobe. So I think we're actually, yeah. Any further speakers?
I'd just like to say,
Councillor Peltz.
in regards to Councillor Roberts' point, I guess I'm happy to support it, because the bottom line is when someone's coming to the table, they've already written in a letter and we've read their letters. So when they actually come to the table, we're only expecting them to drive home their 3 or 4 main drill points, because we've heard it and we've absorbed it and we know what they're talking about. So the time that they need is probably no longer than 3 minutes, because if you grant 10 people 5 minutes each, we've been sitting here for 50 minutes and we still come to the same agreement at the end of the day. So the bottom line is, quite often the points are heard and reheard again. We heard them the first time, and I think I'd just like to drill that home as to why I'm quite comfortable with the 3 minutes.
3 to 5 minutes. Any further speakers? Put the motion to you. All those in favour? All those against? Motion's carried 6-2. Item 5.1.4, Home Care Funding Agreements 2019-2020. Councillor Rotino and myself have a conflict of interest due to being board members of Omeo District Health. I'll now ask Councillor White to resume the chair.
Who's speaking on this? Because I can't see Sash. Okay. Thank you, Madam Mayor. Okay, we will receive our submission from Ms Nelson. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor White. This report is seeking Council's consideration of our recommendation to renew funding agreements that we have with 4 service providers that provide the direct or that contribute to the provision of HAC services, home and community care services across the Shire. the arrangement that we've had in East Gippsland with home care, community health providers, is something that's been really successful because these organisations are based in their communities, working with the people that they're delivering services to for a whole range of different support services. So it is locally delivered. And we've had this arrangement in place for quite some time, but as you'll see from this report, there are quite significant changes and reforms happening in the health and disability sector. And so this report is really saying, based on our engagement with the government, so the state and Commonwealth government and the MAV and other councils, we're really saying at this point in time, because the rollout of the NDIS, the National Disability Insurance Scheme, and changes to the funding, that it's important that Council maintains a holding pattern at this time until we understand more fully how our community will transition from the current arrangements to new funding arrangements. And right now that's not clear. So the recommendation is to extend or enter into new agreements, which is effectively a renewal of previous arrangements with Omeo District Health, Orbost Regional Health Service, Malakuta District Health and Support Service and Gippsland Community Health for a 12-month period. During that period and in the lead up to the end of that 12-month period, officers will again evaluate the impact of the changes and the reforms, but we have created an opportunity for a further extension if at the time it's considered to be appropriate, and happy to answer questions.
So do we have any questions?
Can I ask my question now?
Absolutely, go ahead.
I asked before, sorry if I may take your limelight, Councillor Reeves. I just wanted to know, in your avenue, Ms Nelson, are there further opportunities for Council to be able to get grant funding to feed into this pool? Given the fact that I'm reading here, 40% of our population will be is over 60, and they're quite huge statistics when you look at it. And this area is becoming a real an avenue for aged care, and it's becoming a niche sector. And we're really renowned for our compassionate services up here, and how we actually look after our aged people. Their quality of life is great, and you know, and they're really enjoying the region and the community. So I'm hoping there's other avenues that we can tap into, that we can help aid this particular sector of our community.
Well, you're right that the proportion of older people who will be eligible for this funding will increase over time.
Yeah.
At the moment, the way this works, local government in Victoria makes a contribution from its own resources to the delivery of these services. And councils all over the state are reviewing their contribution in the context of these reforms. So at the moment, what council does is provide funding equal to 25% of the grants that these organisations directly receive from the Victorian government. So there isn't further grant funding that council can attract to support this. So this is resources that council is putting into this program for the reasons that you've just outlined in terms of how important it is to maintain people's health and well-being and keeping people in their places, particularly in small communities where that's where someone may have lived all of their lives. So at the moment there isn't an opportunity to find additional funds, but what we're recommending is that we should monitor how the new funding arrangements through the NDIS and other streams of funding, how that becomes allocated to people in this community, and then what council's role is into the future. So in the next 12 months we'll do that work.
Can I just have one more follow-up question on that?
Yeah.
In regards to this, I'm finding myself, not that my father is eligible for this kind of service, but I'm finding he's still in need of some kind of service. But the bottom line for this is the response that is available to people's demise in their abilities. And I think it's something that's really important to people in this position, that our reaction time or our reaction sources of this is responsive to their ailing issues. I think that's probably what I'm trying to get to.
Yeah, look, it's a challenge, I guess, in terms of how the providers, the resources they have to distribute to the people who are most in need. And many of these services are universally accessible services, so people are eligible when they reach a particular age or circumstance. And what, in fact, the service providers are telling us is that with the transition to the NDIS, there are people that they have not known about in the past who are emerging as eligible for funding. So there will be changes in the way that people access different levels of support, and that's really what I'm saying in terms of understanding how our community transitions from the current arrangements to new ones, and to what extent council needs to continue to be a supporter of these services. Victoria is unusual across Australia because in Victoria, local government has traditionally had a role in providing a contribution to these services, where it doesn't happen in most other states. So I think that councils in Victoria, in light of the kind of discussions that council's been having today about budget, you know, realistically, most councils are looking at a review of the way that they engage in this service. It's important to every council that their ageing community is well serviced. The question is, does council continue to have a role as these funding arrangements and the system is reformed over time? So I think it's an important question ultimately for council to grapple with.
I'm happy to second it.
Well, do we have any more questions? Thank you, Ms Nelson. Do we have somebody to... right, Mark, Councillor Reeves, and seconder, Councillor Peltz. Would you like to speak?
Thanks, Mr Deputy Mayor. Look, this is a very important space given the demographic of our community councillors and also the transition to NDIS. I do note and ask again the CEO that keep us abreast of the changes, even though there's a note in here for you to exercise an option, but I'm sure you will keep us informed of that. The main reason being, councillors, is that our community is unique. We are so dispersed, and as you can see, we distribute these funds to those 4 organisations to deliver these services across the 4 corners of our shire. And what we're seeing and what I'm concerned about with NDIS is that change from what we have known as and valued as place-based services might change, and those recipients, those needy members of our community, might be serviced by people from afar and who they don't know, and so on. And that's one of my concerns. While there's a potential great advantage through the NDIS and the changes that are potential here, but there's also something that we need to keep a watching brief on as councillors if we're concerned about our community, which we are, as I said, because of the demographic, the far-flung nature of our community. Our members, our constituents who are tucked away in corners, up valleys, around the back of our little hamlets, and are used to those place-based services. We don't want to diminish that level of service that we provide.
Would you like to speak to the motion?
Yes, I would like to speak to it, and I'd just like to highlight, with regards to our budget that we've just moved, that the council's contribution in our notes, and I'm reading from them, for the 18-19 financial year are yet to be finalised, but the amount exceeds approximately $690,000 across the 4 service providers, which I reckon is fantastic. And here we are looking at, you know, hidden ways that we're cost cutting, but I really hope this is an area that we won't be cost cutting in. And I really think that, that, you know, I look at it and I just sort of think, you get to this ability stage in life, and, you know, you sort of think that you'd like to be looked after, and I just sort of hope that that's an area that we definitely do not look at in the way of cost cutting from our CEO point of view. Anyway, I just wanted to raise that.
Do we have any more speakers? Right, well, at this stage, we'll put this to the vote. All those for? Carried 6-0. May call the Mayor back in, please.
Okay. 5.2.1 Planning Permit Application 289/2018/P, application for a two-lot subdivision to excise an existing dwelling at 1090 Deptford Road, Clifton Creek. And I have a request to speak from Alan Sheridan. He is here? No? Okay.
Madam Mayor, I did observe him leave quite some time ago, and he hasn't been back.
No. If not, I'll ask Ms Nicole Reynolds to come forward and speak to the item, please.
Good afternoon, councillors. This item, you may recall, was a deferred item that was presented for consideration at the meeting of the 5th of June, wherein the matter was deferred. Just by summation, this is an application which proposes a two-lot subdivision to excise an existing dwelling at a farming property at 1090 Deptford Road. The land is approximately 78 hectares in area and contains an existing dwelling and associated rural infrastructure. The land is zoned farming zone, which is similar to the land in the surrounding area. On balance, officers have assessed the application and we consider it to be deemed that it is unable to meet the provisions of the purposes of the farming zone. The overall aim of the farming zone is in fact to maintain and improve agricultural production of land. The recommendation before you seeks to issue a notice of decision to refuse to issue a planning permit based on 6 grounds. Our officer's assessment is as follows. The proposed subdivision results in an unacceptable fragmentation of rural land. The proposed subdivision results in a rural living outcome within the farming zone. The subdivision creates a small lot, less than the scheduled 40 hectares in the farming zone. The proposed subdivision results in an as-of-right use for the purposes of use of the balanced lot for the purposes of a dwelling in an area nominated for farming. In addition, the as-of-right use is established within an area that's encumbered by the bushfire management overlay provisions. The smaller lot is created in an area not zoned specifically for rural living purposes. Subdivision results in an additional dwelling within the rural landscape. The application provides no compelling reasons for the additional dwelling. When assessing applications within the farming zone, it's important to ensure that rural living outcomes are not the outcomes. Farm dwellings are genuinely required to support agricultural enterprises, are not a form of rural residential development. Thank you.
Thanks, Ms Reynolds. Are there questions, councillors? No. No further questions. I have a recommendation before us. Councillor Roberts.
I'd like to move the alternate motion that's been circulated, Madam Mayor.
Thanks, Councillor Roberts. Do we have a seconder for the alternative motion? Councillor White. Thanks. Councillor Roberts, do you wish to speak?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I don't have anything prepared, so I'll try and keep it succinct, but it seems to me that as was mentioned by the officer, the outcome of the farming zone is to be able to retain the use for agricultural purposes. However, the applicant wishes to subdivide because he's not able to currently use the the land as it currently stands. I believe in lack of a proper rural use plan, this is the only real step forward that will allow somebody to be able to take up ownership of the second lot and actually try and gain some sort of valuable use out of it. So I urge councillors to support the alternative motion. Thank you.
Thanks, Councillor Roberts. Councillor White, do you wish to speak to the motion?
I was looking at part 3 of this. I would expect that this is just a standard format referring to gas services, etc., which obviously be part.
Ms Reynolds, do you wish to clarify?
Are you referring to a condition number 3? Is that correct?
Yep.
Could we just flick the page over with respect? Thank you. Thank you, Councillor White, for your question. Yes, this is a standard condition that relates to two-lot subdivisions that goes to requirements to enter into agreements with the utility installations. So with respect to your question, it is a standard condition.
Did you just say anything further, Councillor White? No. Any further speakers? Question, Councillor Roberts.
I've got a question. I noticed what we've done in the past when we've done this, it's recommended that the point 3 also required the provisioning of optic fibre services, which we found to be quite entertaining. I noticed that's not in point 3 of this document. Has there something changed in the requirements?
Thank you, Councillor, for your question. Yes, that relates to subdivisions of properties where they've got access to telecommunication fibres and not into farming areas. So you don't see those standard conditions in the farming zone areas. Yeah.
Thanks. Speakers against? Speakers for? Councillor Rotino.
Thanks, Madam Mayor. Look, I suppose this is just a bit of my own personal view on a few things, but I have seen some fantastic farmland around this region cut up and subdivided, and I've seen other land that's marginal where they couldn't subdivide, it would be better suited to subdivision. So what I'm trying to say is there's a lot of inconsistencies around this, and in the absence of the rural land use strategy, I'm happy to support this alternate recommendation motion. Thank you.
Thanks, Councillor Rotino. Are there any further speakers? Councillor Roberts, do you wish to have a right of reply? No? I'll put the motion to you. All those in favour? Those against? Motion carried 7-1. Item 5.2.2, adoption of the draft Eagle Point structure plan. We have some requests to speak to this agenda item. First off is Mr. Andrew Bassett. Would you wish to come to the microphone? And just to let you know, you have 5 minutes to speak.
Madam Chair, councillors, mine's very brief. I'll straight to the point. We've great concerns in regards to the proposed review or the removal of the restrictive covenant, and we continue to object to any variation or modification of the restrictive covenant. Removing the covenant completely, we believe, will suffer detrimental effects to the residents on the following grounds. The restrictive covenant, which is a registered covenant under property law, was put in place for the sole reason of protecting the character of Matheson's Road precinct, which has been maintained for over 30 years and should be preserved. The covenant has served the precinct well until recent events such as Section 128 on the 28th of December 2017, resulting in the loss of privacy and overlooking on neighbourhood private areas and living areas and gardens. The dominance of multiple dwellings when viewed from original lot owners' properties, the loss of spaciousness, beauty and privacy. We do not have faith that the removal will be in our interests given the Council's actions in the past, i.e. Section 128 of 2017, and are proven not to act in the interest of original landowners, whereby varying the covenant to reward those who are in breach of the original restrictive covenant. Thank you, Madam Mayor.
Thank you, Mr Bassett. I'll now ask Mr Graham Barnett to come and speak.
Thank you, Madam Mayor, councillors. Good afternoon. My name's Graham Barnett. I live at 140 Forge Creek Road, near the Painesville Roundabout Road. And I'd like to speak on the report by Ms Reynolds, particularly about in relation to the East Gippsland wastewater facility located some 900 metres from my property, or house actually. These matters are referred to in pages 58 and 59 of the report. Only in the last few days have I been advised of a possible need to provide protection for their facility, East Gippsland Waters, in the form of buffers or planning overlays which would require a separate planning scheme process. However, I submit that if East Gippsland Water adopted effective maintenance procedures for optimum plant reliability and performance, there would be no need to provide such protection. The word protection seems a strange expression to me anyway. On the contrary, it must be surely in the best interests of East Gippsland Shire and ratepayers to have some form of reassurance from East Gippsland Water that their plant will not in any way be a safety risk to residents, rather than to obstruct development on my property by the use of buffers. In the East Gippsland News only a couple of weeks ago, I read that it was called Bumper Engineering Projects. I read that East Gippsland Water customers stand to benefit from the latest $6.3 million round of engineering projects designed to safeguard and enhance water services. But there's absolutely no mention in that article of protecting their Forge Creek Road wastewater treatment plant, and I wonder why that is the case. Further, a 2011 US EPA report on principles of design and operations of wastewater treatment pond systems for plant operators, engineers and managers, specifically on buffer zones, clause 2.52, states for several good reasons that therefore designing extensive buffer zones for aerosol containment is not recommended. So I must contest sections of the Eagle Point plan which refer to the specific control of new residential dwellings around Painesville wastewater treatment plant to reduce the risk of offensive odours, however misconceived or inconsequential these risks or perceptions might be. I generally support the draft plan, in particular the removal of the restrictive covenant, but must request that these last-minute updated requirements or inclusions for the treatment plant be removed, please, before it is adopted by Council. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr Barnett. Sure. Councillor Peltz.
Ms Reynolds, may I ask, with regards to Mr Barnett's request that more ownership should be taken on the Water Authority to mask the odours from that, the ponds that they're actually got there, and I don't think that's an unreasonable thing. How do we go about addressing that in regards to this Eagle Point plan?
Thank you, Councillor Peltz, for your question. Essentially, if I may answer it in this way, the structure plan is part of the purpose of the structure plan is to establish the high-level strategic directions for Eagle Point. And one of the directions is to recognise and protect the existing infrastructure for East Gippsland Water in the form of the wastewater treatment plant. This is not something that is specific to us locally. It is a state provision in relation to protection of these assets with respect to infrastructure. Your second part of the question related to the process. There is potentially a second process with respect to preparation of planning scheme amendment documentation to be initiated by East Gippsland Water in serving to recognise and protect this infrastructure. So the Eagle Point structure plan provides that high level recognition that the wastewater treatment plant is there. It also announces that we will work collaboratively in the future with East Gippsland Water to ensure that the right planning controls are in place. Furthermore, the Eagle Point Structure Plan foreshadows that the appropriate process is another planning scheme amendment process, wherein issues in relation to ongoing operational requirements and issues relating to schedules and controls in relation to residential are able to be addressed, and addressed in a level of detail that we do not have at hand at the moment.
Councillor White.
So then going forward, you would expect that Mr Barnett's concerns would be addressed, even if the plan is adopted, that he will still be, his considerations will be looked at in conjunction with East Gippsland Water and East Gippsland Shire.
Thank you, Councillor White. Yes, the property rights are protected through the requirement that a planning scheme amendment be prepared to implement any new requirements in relation to the protection of this facility and the impact it has on land and dwellings around. There will be, if East Gippsland Water choose to be a proponent and advance a planning scheme amendment, the process will enable public notification and discussion with landowners directly affected by foreshadowed controls.
Thank you. I now have Miss Sandy McSweeney to come and speak.
Thank you all for letting me speak today. We have a property that is located at 30 Forge Creek Road. I've made a detailed submission to the Planning Department with regards to their plans to do a number of changes to the way our land is treated. They would like to, in item A10 of their draft proposal, they want to rezone our property to low density residential from general residential. Our property adjoins other general residential properties, and as such we would like for it to remain as general residential. Our property is basically our superannuation fund. For us to have this change of zoning, it will restrict our ability to fund our retirement, basically. It will change who and how we can market the property if we choose to redevelop it. The constraints that the planning system has in place will make sure that we don't make an undesirable development from the land that we currently have. We have constraints of topography, the bushfire management overlay, and we don't think that it's necessary to rezone our land. There is also changes that in the draft proposal to that are identified as giving land over to public conservation for open space purposes. We are not in support of this. The land that we have currently is wholly maintained by us. We purchased the land from the Shire in 1996. When that was purchased, the land was basically overrun with blackberry, weeds, and was totally unusable. We now have open grassland. We have very manicured type environment, and us giving the land back to the Shire we can't see how it's going to get managed any better than it was back in 1996. We also have a significant issue with stormwater that is directed onto our property that from other adjoining developments, which we've approached the planning department to try and address on a number of occasions dating back to 2013, and we have had no resolution. So I would like to try and suggest that the adoption of this draft plan be postponed from this meeting. We were advised less than a week ago that this draft plan was coming to today's meeting, and we have not had any time to prepare anything to try and halt this at all or defer it. The submission that we made back in November 2018, we've not had any response back from the planning department since November 2018 up until a week ago with regards to our submission. I don't know how it can be passed when there is no consultation with the actual landowners. So I would request that at the minimum that this be deferred.
Councillor Peltz.
If I may, Ms Reynolds, just in regards to Mrs McSweeney's statement that she hasn't had any response back from a letter since 2018 in regards to her concerns. Has there been review or return of correspondence in regards to what she's talking about?
Thank you, Councillor Peltz, for your question. We have been in an ongoing conversation with the landowner at 34 Forge Creek Road. There have been meetings following the submissions throughout the process, and 30 Forge. There have been meetings in relation to the draft structure plan on an ongoing basis. There has been correspondence over the period of the strategic planning process.
Councillor Ellis.
Just to clarify there, so is Ms McSweeney right in saying that she and the other two presenters have only had 1 week's notice? Is that correct?
Letters were forwarded a week ago by email confirming that confirming that over the coming weeks that this matter would be listed with council. So a week ago, yes.
One final question, because I'm thinking that I might make a suggestion to council that we adjourn this meeting to allow the presenters to meet with the staff to resolve the issues, or potentially resolve the issues to therefore enhance the project. But the questions or matters that have been put forward to today's meeting, before I make that move, have they been presented to the council planners previously and discussed with each of the three presenters and some sort of resolution sought?
We have had multiple conversations with the presenters over the period of time. The presenters today, yes, there have been multiple over the life of this project, yes.
So has any resolution been able to be achieved, obviously, with the matters so that Mrs McSweeney thinks he's sitting there, have raised?
My apologies, Councillor Ellis, could you just repeat that question?
I referred to Mrs McSweeney just in the sense that she's sitting at the table, but with the issues that she's raised, has there been any attempt or any resolution achieved in relation to the matters that she's put forward to council today?
Perhaps if I may present the report, I may be able to answer that question in relation, but succinctly, we have had multiple conversations and meetings on site and in our council offices with a submitter in relation specifically to land at 30 Forge Creek Road.
Okay, well, on that note, I might ask that you present the report, Ms Reynolds, and then that way we can direct any further questions following the information that we receive. Thanks, Ms McSweeney. Ms Reynolds.
Madam Mayor, if I may just interrupt, I'll just foreshadow that I may make a move a motion that this matter, after the report, may be adjourned to a future meeting.
Deferred. Yep. Thanks, Ms Reynolds.
Thank you very much for the opportunity. Today, the purpose of our council report is to present to you for adoption the draft Eagle Point Structure Plan. Just to recap, what is a precinct structure plan? It's a high-level master plan that we do for the whole of the township of Eagle Point. This is a process that has been afoot since 2012, and we re-energised the project in 2016. The approach that we have taken in developing a precinct master plan is to establish a vision and prepare a series of technical reports, create a structure that will therefore make the place. This is high-level approach to how we prepare these plans. The draft structure plan was released for comment in September 2018, following an emerging options paper that was actually released in June 2017. Both these processes resulted in a series of further on-site and a series of landowner meetings, in addition to the publication of a What We Heard paper informing every landowner in Eagle Point of our progress and of the key strategic directions which we were following. The community consultation period undertaken was an 8-week period, and we received comments and feedback from a series of agencies and stakeholders, including landowners. As a result, our final draft has been modified to make some additional references in respect to natural hazards, bushfire, flooding, and the issues raised in relation to the East Gippsland Water Treatment Facility. The structure plan proposes a vision statement which we've tested with the community in relation to setting a goal for what is the vision for Eagle Point. The structure plan will identify a settlement boundary, and it will identify strategic sites where we will need to do further work with landowners, specifically in relation to some sites. These sites either have been identified as performing strategic importance to Eagle Point, and we will require more detailed discussion as we move forward in relation to the specific controls relating to these sites. Also, in relation to the structure plan, it enunciates and describes some key residential neighbourhoods which provide us with guidance on how we guide change over time. The structure plan will support the growth of the Eagle Point Primary School on the current site and includes the identification of land for future growth of the school on that site. The structure plan will recognise and reinforces the importance of the foreshore as a key community precinct. If I may just briefly take to the key planning matters that have arisen through this journey. The first one is the bushfire planning. As a result of key VC amendments at state level, we took the action of commissioning a peer review, an independent peer review of the draft structure by a bushfire planning consultant. This report and peer review confirms that we are have a sound strategic position and that future development will in fact be concentrated in areas of low risk. We have added new sections to the structure plan in response to the new controls at state level in relation to bushfire. The Eagle Point Structure Plan's response to bushfire is to confirm that any new development areas will require to have a bell level of low, And this negates our need, this addresses our response to the state level changes with bushfire. The plan has been updated to add a new section in relation to flooding and resilience by adding a section on natural hazard of flooding. With respect to the Matheson's Road or the restrictive covenant area, the structure plan has been identified over a long period of time as being a key strategic document to provide us with direction in relation specifically to this neighbourhood. Council has been and will continue to receive legal advice in relation to this matter of restrictive covenant. I refer to the Speaker who took us to Planning Scheme Amendment C128, wherein the panel report confirmed that we were in fact working towards finalising the preparation of the Eagle Point structure plan in order to advance our progress in our overall consideration of the impact of the restrictive covenant, the current zoning provisions and our future directions for this precinct. In this way, a future planning scheme amendment documentation will need to be drafted, and in doing so we will need to address specifically how the planning scheme responds to the issue of the restrictive covenant in reviewing the covenant. The structure plan proposes to retain the existing community hall at the existing location. I'll note that our recommendation also makes reference to a place naming request. As part of the community consultation, it was raised that an element of part of Eagle Point that's known at a locality known as Eagle Point, that residents had concerns that they would like to, for us to address the correct place name, and that's a separate process. And I take you to the recommendation at hand. Essentially, our recommendation today is to adopt the structure plan. Our recommendation is to allow us to continue discussions with CFA in making sure that our bushfire response is appropriate. Our recommendation seeks us permission to commence the preparation of the planning scheme amendment documentation, which will require further detailed discussions with landowners. The recommendation notes ongoing budgetary planning processes, and it also seeks to commence the statutory process associated in relation to place names and localities, which is a separate process not undertaken by the Planning Act. Thank you.
Thanks, Ms Reynolds. Questions, councillors? Councillor Peltz?
Can I just ask Ms Reynolds, what's the urgency of pushing this through today? In regards to your eyes, other than and not holding back and talking to the people that are needing some further consultation?
Thank you for your question, Councillor Peltz. There is no urgency that it has to be done today. There are no statutory requirements for it to be considered. I do say, though, that we have undertaken extensive community consultation and that our discussions with landowners will continue upon the adoption of our recommendation. Specifically with response to the specific landowner, these areas of land are identified in the planning in the structure plan as requiring further and ongoing discussions, which will need to take place as part of the preparation of the planning scheme amendment documentation, which will implement the key strategic directions. What the adoption of the structure plan does is establishes the high-level strategic directions for Eagle Point that can then continue our conversations specifically with specific landowners.
Do you have a question, Councillor Ellis? No?
As a foreshadow, I'd like to move
Yeah. Councillor Roberts, do you have a question?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Ms Reynolds, so you're saying that the affected landowners still have an avenue of negotiating the outcome of their property rezoning, is that correct?
Thank you, Councillor Roberts. Yes, the structure plan sets the strategic direction at high level, the specifics and relation to the specific details relating to rezoning requests, the requirements that we will propose to put in the planning scheme, in the East Gippsland planning scheme, are still open to a formal planning scheme amendment process. Yes, there is into the future further and ongoing opportunity for specific details to specific land to be addressed.
Just a follow-up question. Thank you for that. Ultimately, any outcome around rezoning would need to be consistent, and it wouldn't be done on a title by title basis. It would have to be a consistent blocks of land would be zoned accordingly.
Thank you, Councillor Roberts. The approach that the structure plan is proposing is a precinct approach. Yes, there are individual titles and properties that make up those precincts, but this is the first step to establish those neighbourhood character statements about the very values that make up the land, upon which we will then commence the structuring of the actual planning scheme amendment documentation and the planning control changes as applying to the individual parcels. The point being that it's a precinct approach.
Thanks, Ms Reynolds. Councillor White.
Thanks, Madam Mayor. The question I have is, number 30, Eagle Point Road, is beside residential allotments. What is the current zoning of number 30 at this stage?
Number 30, Forge Creek Road, is currently zoned general residential zone. It has recently also been partially contained within the bushfire management overlay. This property adjoins Crown Land. It adjoins and contains Tyers Creek Waterway, which is vegetated. The land is partially encumbered by the bushfire management overlay, and we have commissioned, as part of our peer review with our bushfire management consultant, was to review the status of this land, having regard for the incorporation into the bushfire management overlay. I advance that it is a cautionary and an appropriate response that the bushfire planning be taken into consideration for the future use of this parcel. I reiterate that I have advanced that the bushfire management consultant is of the opinion that we need to be able to meet the Bell low risk. This property is included in the bushfire management overlay. We will need to work through the details in relation to the development, having regard for that overriding bushfire management.
Thanks. Councillor Ellis.
Madam Mayor, I'd like to move that this matter be deferred until the next ordinary meeting of council, to be held after the in August. And the rationale for this is that I've read the recommendations on this, and I see that they're all logical and they're all ongoing, and they can address many of the issues potentially, or accommodate the issues raised by the speakers here today. So let's get it right for these three members of the community by giving them the early opportunity to have one more meeting with the council planners to get a clear understanding on their positions with council. I don't see the deferment of the matter holding up the process in the structure plan itself. It accommodates the concerns of the speakers, and finally it get things right, and hopefully we will be able to resolve this matter so that when it is brought back in August, it's just a matter of virtually passing the matter through if things are able to be resolved. So I look to council for support on this motion. Thank you.
Thanks, Councillor Ellis. Do we have a seconder? Councillor Roberts, thank you. Do you wish to speak? No? Okay, I'll put any other further speakers? For or against? No. I'll put the motion to you. All those in favour? All those against? Motion carried. 5-3. Thanks, Ms Reynolds. Item 6, urgent and other business. No? Yep, just before we move in, I'd just like to acknowledge that this is Ms Kate Nelson's last council meeting before her departure date in July. So I'd like to take this moment to acknowledge your many years of service to the council and the East Gippsland region, and appreciate all that you have done, and best wishes for your future endeavours. Thank you.
Madam Mayor, I'll move the council now close the meeting to the public in accordance with the provisions of the Section 89(2)D of the Local Government Act 1989 to consider items 7.1 to 7.8, as these items relate to contractual matters.
Thanks, Councillor Peltz. All those in favour? Motion carried.